The classroom felt different after hours, empty, quiet, almost like it was holding its breath. I was sitting there alone, heart pounding, knowing she'd be walking through that door any second. This was supposed to be just a tutoring session, nothing more. But my mind was already racing, filled with thoughts I shouldn't be having. When the door finally opened, she walked in, and it was like the room itself leaned toward her. She was stunning, the kind of stunning that made you forget how to speak. Her hair, soft and wavy, framed her face perfectly, and her eyes, sharp yet kind, locked onto mine with a look that made it hard to breathe. Every move she made was smooth, confident, like she didn't even realize the effect she had on anyone around her. She was here because I was falling behind. My grades were slipping, and my parents were growing worried. That's when they arranged for the private lessons. I thought it would be boring, just hours of catching up on what I'd missed. But then, as she walked in, I felt a shiver run down my spine. She was so damn beautiful and young. Believe me, I never expected such a young private lesson tutor. "Ready to get to work?" she asked, her voice warm and calm, completely at ease. I tried to answer, but the words caught in my throat. She smiled and took a seat next to me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off her skin. Her scent filled the space between us. Sweet, intoxicating, and my mind started to blur. She opened the textbook, diving straight into the lesson. Her tone was professional, but every time she leaned in, her arm brushing against mine, it sent a jolt through me. I could feel my heart racing, and I knew she could sense it. But she didn't pull away. She stayed close, her voice soft and encouraging, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But it was. The air was thick with unspoken tension. I tried to focus on the words in front of me, but all I could think about was her. How close she was. How her eyes flicked to mine when she thought I wasn't looking. This wasn't just a lesson. It was something more. Something dangerous brewing just beneath the surface. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking it. But the way she moved, the way her hand would occasionally brush against mine, said otherwise. Each touch felt like a spark, igniting something in me that I knew should stay buried. Every time our eyes met, it felt like a challenge, a question hanging in the air that neither of us dared to answer. She kept explaining the material, her voice steady, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something that made my stomach twist in ways I didn't understand. My heart raced not because of the lesson, but because of her, and the tension in the room kept building, thick and suffocating. We were supposed to be going over algebra, solving equations and focusing on my grades, but the numbers blurred on the page. All I could focus on was her, the way her lips moved as she spoke, the way her fingers traced the edge of the textbook, almost as if she was trying to keep her hands busy to avoid touching me again. By the end of that first session, I knew this was a problem. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, in the way my heart ached for the next lesson. This was more than just tutoring. This was the start of something dangerous, something we were both teetering on the edge of. And even though I knew it was wrong, a part of me couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The sessions continued, each one starting with a strict focus on academics. But no matter how much we tried to keep things professional, there was an unspoken energy in the room. She was captivating in a way that made it hard to concentrate. Every time she leaned over to check my work, my pulse quickened. She seemed unaware of the effect she had on me. Or maybe she was simply ignoring it. Her eyes would meet mine whenever she explained something, and for a split second, it felt like there was more than just a lesson passing between us. I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew how I felt, that she sensed the growing tension. Our conversations stayed focused on school, but the pauses in between felt heavy. Every glance, every fleeting touch of her hand on my shoulder seemed to linger in the air. It was subtle, but the attraction was there, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for one of us to break. As the weeks passed, our sessions took on a different tone. She began to share little details about her life, stories about her college days, her favorite books, even the pressures of being a young teacher. It was nothing too personal, but it made her seem more real, more approachable. We started laughing more. She'd tease me when I got a problem wrong, and I'd throw a joke back at her, making her laugh in a way that was warm and genuine. The room felt lighter, the strict lines between teacher and student slowly blurring. I knew it was crossing a line, these feelings that were growing inside me. But with every laugh, every smile she threw my way, it became harder to ignore. I was developing feelings for her, deep, confusing feelings that I knew I shouldn't have. Yet each time we were together felt more like something I wanted to keep going, something we were both silently allowing to happen. It started with small compliments. At first, they were about my progress, how much I was improving, how quickly I was catching up, but then they became more personal. "You're really bright, you know," she said one day, her eyes holding mine just a little too long. "You just needed someone to believe in you." Her words sent a warm rush through me. No one had ever spoken to me like that, with such genuine belief. She wasn't just talking about my grades anymore. It felt deeper, like she was seeing me in a way others didn't. Each compliment lifted me, made me feel like I was more than just another student struggling to keep up. But it was the way she looked at me that really got to me. There was something in her eyes, a softness that hinted at more than just a teacher's concern. I found myself wondering if she felt it too, the attraction that was slowly growing between us. Every time she smiled at me, every time her hand lingered on my shoulder, it felt like a secret only we shared. Her compliments, while seemingly innocent, started to blur the line even more, hinting at something that made my heart race every time we were alone together. The dynamic between us shifted. What started as innocent encouragement began to turn into something else entirely. During our lessons, she'd tease me lightly when I made a mistake. "Come on, I know you can do better than that," she'd say with a grin, her tone playful, her eyes sparkling. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, the way she leaned in close when explaining a problem. Her hand would brush against my shoulder, her touch lingering for just a second longer than necessary. Each time, a jolt of excitement shot through me, leaving me both exhilarated and confused. Was this just her being friendly, or was there something more? I started to crave these moments, the little touches, the playful banter. They made the room feel warmer, more intimate. I'd catch myself looking forward to our sessions, not for the tutoring, but for her, waiting for the next joke, the next brush of her hand against mine. The flirting, while subtle, was undeniable, and I found myself falling deeper into the attention she gave me, addicted to the thrill of it all. One evening, after a tough lesson that had my head spinning, she suggested we take a break. "You look like you need a breather," she said with a soft laugh. I nodded, grateful for the pause. She grabbed 2 waters and we settled in our chairs, the textbooks pushed aside. The conversation started innocently enough. How school was stressing me out, how my parents were on my back about my grades, but then it veered into deeper territory. She began sharing more about her life, her struggles when she was my age, the pressure she felt to succeed. It surprised me how easily the words flowed between us, how natural it felt to open up to her. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone, about my fears, my insecurities, the parts of myself I usually kept hidden. She listened intently, her eyes softening with understanding. The distance between us seemed to shrink with every word exchanged, the air growing heavier, charged with something that wasn't supposed to be there. As we talked, the tension in the room became almost tangible. Our eyes met, lingering a moment too long, both of us realizing we were crossing a line that we couldn't uncross. The conversation had shifted from teacher and student to something far more personal, and in that shared vulnerability, we both knew we were stepping into dangerous territory. The tension had been building for weeks, a quiet storm neither of us acknowledged out loud. But one evening in the middle of a session, she hesitated, her eyes flicking to mine with a look I hadn't seen before. "You know," she began slowly, her voice almost a whisper, "I feel like we have a connection, more than just a teacher and student." Her words hung in the air, heavy and electric. My heart pounded as I searched for something. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. I feel it too, I admitted, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. For a long moment, we were both silent, caught in the gravity of what we had just confessed. The air around us felt thick, the room shrinking to just the space between our eyes. We didn't act on it, didn't move closer or touch, but everything was different now. The line was drawn clearly before us, and we were standing right at its edge, teetering with the knowledge that we were no longer just teacher and student. A few days later, she suggested an extended session. "You've got that big test coming up," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes saying something else. "We can stay late after school. Make sure you're fully prepared." I agreed, knowing this was more than just about the test. The school was empty when we started, the halls eerily quiet, the classrooms dimly lit by the evening sun. We worked hard at first, focusing on the material, but as the hours ticked by, the academic focus began to fade. We sat closer than usual, our shoulders almost touching as we pored over the textbooks. Eventually, the conversation drifted. We started talking about life, about dreams and fears, things that had nothing to do with school. The unspoken attraction between us grew louder in the silence, filling the room with a tension that was impossible to ignore. Every glance, every brush of our hands was charged, the air around us humming with possibilities. We were no longer tutoring and learning. We were something else entirely, and as the night grew darker, it became clear that we were both standing on the edge, waiting for one of us to make the next move. The session dragged on longer than usual, neither of us wanting to be the first to leave. As we finally began to pack up, the tension between us reached a boiling point. She hesitated, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes catching mine in a way that made my breath hitch. For a moment, we just stood there, the room filled with a silence so thick it was almost suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing. She looked at me, her gaze full of uncertainty and something else, something that mirrored what I was feeling. Without thinking, I moved closer, drawn to her like a magnet. Then, in a moment of weakness, we crossed the line. Our lips met in a brief, intense kiss, the electricity between us sparking to life. It was everything and nothing all at once. A rush of emotions, fear, excitement, all crashing over us in that single forbidden moment. We pulled away quickly, both stunned by what we had just done. The gravity of our actions hung heavy in the air, the room now a cage holding the secret we had just created. We stood there, breathing heavily, the realization settling in. We had crossed a line, one that neither of us could undo. After that kiss, everything changed. We tried to go back to normal, to pretend that we could continue our tutoring sessions like nothing had happened, but it was impossible. The chemistry between us was too strong, the memory of that kiss lingering in every glance, every word exchanged. Our sessions took on a new meaning. We met in secret, using the guise of tutoring to steal moments away from prying eyes. We'd find hidden places where we could be alone, the thrill of the forbidden making each encounter more intense than the last. What started as stolen kisses turned into something more. We crossed boundaries we had no business crossing, our secret affair becoming an all-consuming force. The danger and excitement of it all hooked us both, pulling us deeper into a world where reality didn't matter. We knew it was wrong, that we were risking everything, but the thrill was addictive. In those stolen moments, it was just us, free from the rules of the outside world. And even though we knew the consequences could be devastating, we couldn't stop. We didn't want to. The affair continued, but the excitement that once fueled it began to fade under the weight of secrecy. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, paranoid that someone would catch us. She became more anxious with each passing day, the fear of being exposed gnawing at her. She knew what was at stake, her career, her reputation, her entire life. For me, it was the guilt that weighed me down. Every time I saw her at school, pretending to be nothing more than my teacher, it ate at me. Our once innocent tutoring sessions had turned into a web of lies, each one more complex than the last. I felt the burden of those lies every time I looked at her, every time we met in secret. It was getting harder to maintain the facade. We were playing with fire, and deep down, we both knew it. The excitement of the forbidden was slowly being replaced by a constant, nagging fear. The walls were closing in, and with every passing day, the risk of being caught felt more real. The strain of living a double life began to take its toll. The pressure of hiding what we were doing started to chip away at the fantasy we had created. We argued more, small disagreements turning into heated exchanges. The secrecy that once thrilled us now hung over every interaction like a dark cloud. At school, she had to maintain her role as the teacher, professional, distant, untouchable. I had to act like just another student, sitting through her classes with the memory of our secret encounters burning in my mind. It was exhausting, this constant duality of being her student by day and her lover in the shadows. The reality of what we'd done was starting to erode everything between us. What had once felt like an escape now felt like a prison. The bars made of our own choices. We both knew we were headed toward a breaking point, but neither of us wanted to face it. The fantasy we had been living was unraveling, and all that was left was the looming consequences of the line we had crossed. It was bound to happen. Rumors started circulating around the school, whispers in the hallways that something was off. Students noticed how much time we spent together, the extra tutoring sessions that seemed to go on for hours behind closed doors. Teachers exchanged knowing glances, suspicion growing as they watched us more closely. The whispers grew louder, morphing into full-blown accusations behind our backs. "Have you heard?" they'd say, their voices hushed, but the words cutting through the air like a knife. I could feel the eyes on us every time we were in the same room. She could feel it too. The air was thick with tension, with the knowledge that our secret was no longer safe. We were forced to confront the reality of what we had done. Our world, built on stolen moments and secrecy, was crumbling around us. We knew the consequences could be catastrophic. She was on the verge of losing everything she had worked for, and I was about to be exposed in front of my peers and family. We were standing on the edge, staring into the abyss, knowing that the slightest misstep would send us spiraling into disaster. The truth came crashing down like a tidal wave. One afternoon, we were caught in a compromising situation. Too close, too familiar, in a place we thought was safe. A fellow teacher saw us, the shock and judgment clear in their eyes. The moment froze, the air sucked out of the room. We were caught, and there was no denying it anymore. The school administration got involved immediately. She was called into the principal's office, where she faced a barrage of accusations and the reality of her actions. Disciplinary action was swift and severe. The news spread like wildfire, the affair laid bare for everyone to see. I was left to deal with the fallout among my peers, whispers and pointed fingers following me everywhere I went. At home, the revelation tore through my family like a hurricane, leaving destruction in its wake. The fantasy we had lived was shattered, replaced by the harsh glare of reality. The consequences were immediate and unforgiving. Her career was over, her reputation in ruins. My life was upended, the trust of those around me broken. We had crossed the line, and now we were paying the price for every stolen moment, every lie we had told. There was no escaping it now. The fallout was swift and brutal. She lost her job almost immediately, escorted out of the school with whispers following her every step. News spread beyond the school walls, and soon she was facing public scrutiny. Her reputation dragged through the mud. The life she had built was in ruins, all because of the line we had crossed. For me, it was a different kind of devastation. My friends looked at me differently, some with pity, others with contempt. The story had spread, twisted into rumors and half-truths, making me an outcast in my own world. At home, the disappointment in my parents' eyes was like a constant shadow, a reminder of how far I had fallen. I was left to grapple with the emotional wreckage, questioning how something that had once felt so thrilling had led to this. We parted ways without a word. There was nothing left to say. The bond we had shared, built on secrecy and stolen moments, was now a scar that neither of us could erase. We never spoke again, and the silence between us became a heavy reminder of the cost of our actions. In the quiet that followed, I had nothing but time to reflect. I thought back to that first tutoring session, how innocent it had seemed, how it had spiraled into something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. Our affair had started as a spark of attraction and grew into a wildfire that consumed everything in its path. It changed us both forever, leaving behind the wreckage of lives that could never go back to what they were before. The aftermath was a constant reminder that some lines, once crossed, leave a mark that time cannot erase. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like for more stories like this one. Goodbye.
Reddit Stories, JJ.